Hi everybody. In this video render video, we're going to take a look at the creation of a number of lighting setups for Twinmotion users. Now, primarily we're looking at Twinmotion users who do not have access to Lumen or the Path Tracer. Perhaps you're on a Mac, or perhaps you're running Twinmotion on some older hardware. We'll go through the creation of these scenes. I'll go through the actual settings, particularly the lighting and ambient settings. And I'll talk about how I got the moods that we're trying to give rise to or elicit. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, everybody. So here we have a number of scenes. These are for basically still images, but they will equally work well for video as well. So we've got a number here: bright day, two different overcast, a sunrise or sunset style image, a stormy image, and finally a snow image. Now, what I'm going to do is run through each of these lighting environments. And again, we are not using Lumen or the Path Tracer. We're primarily just using the default global illumination method within Twinmotion. And I'll run through basically how we set these up. Now, I've kept a stationary camera, so each scene will effectively be the same angle, same shot, but the only thing that'll be different is the lighting environment. Okay, let's go ahead and start with image number 1. And I'll run through all of these settings that we used to get this look. All right, let's get going. So for image number 1, we're doing a very bright day environment. So in terms of the environment settings, you can see that we put the sun intensity to about 68,000, but you could honestly just put this at 70,000 and be fine with that. Now, sun size and sun reflection, I'm not really pushed about this per se, but you can kind of see the sun reflection. We'll just put it at 1/3, and you'll really notice this on the car on the right and a little bit on the roof of the building. So just put that around 1/3. Now, what's really, really important is the ambient setting, and this is going to be one that we're going to come back to again and again and again. And you'll notice that by default, the ambient in Twinmotion is set to about 1. And really, it's not terrible, but you're not getting a huge amount of depth in the shadows. In other words, it's the shadowy areas that are occluded that will help add to the realism. And by default, this is not, it's just not dark enough. Now, with the Path Tracer, you could just turn that on and the shadows will render with very high level of accuracy. In fact, you can even take the ambience up a lot to get those really nice looks. But for this, I think we're going to keep the ambience pretty low. Now, we don't want it so low that it's completely dark. So you have to be very careful with this. And the value that we settled on was 0.4 for this daytime setting. Okay, weather, we've turned everything off. We don't want any fog, any precipitation, don't want any of that. And then we rotate the sun. So right now it's at 112. And you can see by rotating the sun here, we're basically just saying, hey, where do you want the light to be coming from? And I put mine at 112. If you're going for bright, sunny render, what I would suggest doing is try and get the light to fall on the actual home. Rather unsurprisingly, that's what you want to show off. But we also want to make sure that there are shadows in the scene. It'll give this nice sense of where the viewer's eye should go. And in this case, we want it to go on the building, kind of skirting around a little bit around the actual greenery. And so that's where we want those shadows to fall. Now, I am a big fan of shadows falling on the building. I love that dappled look, but I think that's kind of a personal thing. I think some people like that and some people really don't. You'll notice as well, we have not bothered with the months and we have no HDRI turned on. We're not using a HDRI to light the scene. We're just literally using default natural lighting set to 1030, but I think you could probably put that up to 12 if you wanted more kind of, well, that'd be vertical lighting coming down, but 1030, beautiful. And you can see the sky looks absolutely stunning, and we've done nothing special to that. That really is just a case of just the normal sky within Twinmotion looks pretty nice. Now, looks, this value, the sun intensity looks value. By the way, a big thanks to Professor Adam Gill for really giving me amazing insight into this last year. The sun intensity for daytime, I believe, is somewhere between 70 and 100,000 lux. I think 70 is kind of where you want to be. Anything higher is just really, really too bright in my mind. Okay. Horizon, we haven't turned this on because there's nothing else, we're not seeing anything else in the scene. Now, a couple of other things that we do want to look at. Camera settings, just really quickly. Exposure, you always want to turn auto exposure off. You want control over the environment itself. And there's no magic trick to this. You just turn off auto exposure and move that slider to where you get the result you want. And it might not always be an even, like in this case, 5.36. It's a little bit arbitrary, but it's what we settle on because it looks good in the viewport. Now, white balance, generally 6,000 Kelvin for most of these shots. Basically, we want the white balance, if you will, to be more on the blue. This would be very similar to Lumen users maybe adjusting some of the real sky properties. You really just want a bit more blue light in an exterior shot and a little bit more warm light in an interior shot. You can see these lamps behind me. In terms of like sort of Kelvin, they're just a little bit warmer, but we actually want more natural looking blue light outside. Now, local exposure, this is key. And if you're not using the Twinmotion versions that have local exposure, strongly recommend you upgrade or just download the newer versions, right? And this is really, really important. For the highlights, by default, this is set to 0.5 and 0.5. We want to actually crank the highlight. Basically, we're sort of compressing the highlights here a little bit. We're reducing the highlight value. So the sky is not as blown out looking. And you can see it looks a lot more blue. And I think that's what we want. And then the shadows, you'll actually see here, by default, if that's set to 0.5, we actually want to darken the shadows because that is what's really going to help. That and the ambient slider will work kind of hand in hand to get those really dark shadows, which are not native to, I think, the Twinmotion global illumination model. Focal length is just 18. All of my shots will have that. Depth of field, we're not using any of that. And we're not using any film back effects. I'm just going off what's on the viewport there. And so when it comes to the real-time settings here, you can see the global illumination intensity, just kind of crank that up. And the global illumination distance, you can see if I take this really high, it's going to add more, effectively more light, more global illumination here inside the building. I didn't want that, so we turn that down. Again, we want darker, harsher shadows. Now, the overall shadow settings here, you can see if I move this to the left or right, I can basically get softer or smoother shadows. But for a bright day, I actually would prefer these harsher, sharp shadows. And then the shadow bias is going to just determine basically the... Again, I'm going to defer to Professor here on this one here, but I'm just going to crank this to the left. I want as fine detail as we can possibly get for our shadows here. And you can kind of see... By the way, putting the shadows to the lowest didn't work. You look at the background there. You can see all very, very, very low. And then you can kind of see. So mine ended up being a little bit around. I think the overall setting was about this kind of 300 feet area. Again, there's no magic number for that, but just take that slider to where you can get shadows in the background and it looks good. Okay, a couple of other things. Now, under the FX, contrast and saturation, yes, you do want these. You will notice that the defaults, if we just put these like to 50 and we put in the saturation to 50, it's just a little bit too CG looking at the moment. So we do actually want to drop the saturation. And I found 45 is a really good measure for this. And we also want to make sure that when it comes to the contrast, you can see we're adding a bit more contrast. 65 is a really sweet number to go with for this. Now, the last thing we did is the color gradient. And you can see here, we actually have added one of these. Now, a lot of users don't use these, but we scroll on down. I've used this blue tint. So I want to show you none. Very, very green, maybe way too green. And so if we just go down here and we go to the, again, blue tint, there we go. It's almost like a bluish filter or, well, a blue tint, you might say. But it just really ramps up that daylight atmosphere in the overall shot. And then for image size, we would just render this out at 4 or 8K. All right. Hopefully that explains the settings we've used for image 1, our bright day. I think this is beautiful. I would put this up against a Lumen exterior using the original raster engine. I think this is quite comparable. Pretty happy with the look of this. The house is visible. The shadows are sharp. There's a nice ambience to it. I like this. I think this would work fine For somebody doing exterior shots on a Mac or not running Lumen or Path Tracer, I think this is as good as I think I could possibly make in global illumination, default Lumion, or default Twinmotion render look as good as possible. Now, let's get into the far more topical looks, which is the overcast renders. Bit harder to do. Okay, everybody, so now we're going to take a look at the creation of two different overcast styles here. Now, this has become incredibly popular with Twinmotion users because something about the overcast skies and really just the way Twinmotion, especially Lumen and the Path Tracer, handle light just looks so good. It's like the magic secret button to make those Twinmotion renders look amazing. So we're going to do two. And the first will be just a staple one that anyone can use. And then the second one is going to be an attempt to approximate the Lasha look, for want of a better term. And it's called the Lasha look here, just because this gentleman here, Lasha Baramitz, I hope I pronounced that right. Sorry, mate, if I didn't. Who's a Twinmotion user whose work has really just blown up the Twinmotion official community group. He set the standard so unbelievably high. His work is just, it's off the chain good. There's just no other way to describe it. And there's this beautiful overcastness to it. There's these dark shadows and this sort of beautiful, like, gray skylight. Really impressive work. It's the type of work you wish your work looked like. I know I wish mine did. And so we're going to try and approximate that. But the challenge will be here, can we light our scenes a little bit like that without having access to the Path Tracer? And it's very, very, very difficult. First, though, let's look at a more traditional overcast sky that we can work with. So let's look at our settings. Same camera angle, same scene, same everything. Now, first thing is, it starts with the HDRI. And we're going to use Kloppenheim 07, which I believe is one of the default HDRIs within Twinmotion. If not, you should be able to get Kloppenheim 07 from Polyhaven. Now, you can see we've got the details. We've just got everything just loaded up as per default, and we've rotated the sky a little bit, just looking at the reflections more than anything. And then you can see we dropped the intensity. Excuse me. We don't want the intensity to be 100. You can see, ooh, does not look good. So we actually drop it quite low, and I end up dropping this to like 30.29. Let's just put that to 30. All right, that looks okay. Again, we've made no other changes here other than that. So let's go all the way up to the top. You can see by default, Twinmotion will clamp the intensity here, the max intensity for the sun. I believe it, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think it does this for some HDRIs. I don't know if it does it for all of them, but I could be wrong on that. So sun intensity of 10, not making a massive amount of difference here. Sun size and reflection, again, not making a massive amount of difference. But the ambient, again, you can see how important it is if we're trying to get this kind of look to dim the ambience. And we actually have gone even lower than before. We put it to 0.22. Very, very low on the ambient settings. Now, the other thing to make this look a bit better is a bit of this overcast fog. You can see no fog, and we've cranked that up quite a bit as well. So we're just trying to add some foggy atmosphere to the entire scene. Now, we don't have any precipitation on, and our seasons are set as default, and then the sun location is tied to the HDRI rotation. Camera settings, I have effectively changed the same. You can see manual exposure, 3.5. Again, there's no magic number for this. You just got to put it to wherever you think looks good, as long as it doesn't blow out any part of the image. Local exposure, again, unlike before, we've actually turned down the highlight compression completely. We want basically those highlights to be bright, get that hazy sky. Again, you could actually, looking at this, maybe we could actually just crank this all the way. And the shadows, again, very, very dark on the shadows. Just trying to get almost no local exposure on these shadows. We want them to be as dark as possible. Again, white balance, 6000 Kelvin, and everything else has stayed the same. Now, under the Render tab, you can see Global Illumination Intensity. For this, we have cranked it, and the Global Illumination Distance, cranked them all. This is kind of, again, there's no harsh shadows in this scene. Shadow settings for the actual shadows, so you can just see here, just put it to a figure you like. I want more occlusion on the building, so just put it to an arbitrary figure where you get that. And again, that shadow bias, look how low that setting actually is. Really, really, really low. So just 0.1. 0.10. That should be it. Reflection is set to screen space reflections. You can kind of see it affects the door a little bit, but that's about it. We do have some lights on the inside. The lighting for this one is just going to be in both windows have an Omni-light and an area light in them. And you can see the Omni-light, very low attenuation, high intensity. Area lights, again, intensities of 500 and very low attenuation. You can literally see the fall off right there. It just kind of stops. We're trying to add a glow here because really if everything is overcast and gray, we want to balance that a little bit with just a little dash of warmth. You don't want the house to look abandoned or like there's nobody living there. So just add that nice little dash of warmth. And we got some nice warm color settings for the lights as well. We do have shadows turned on. Don't want these lights going through the walls. Looks very pretty. Now, one last thing as well, under the FX tab, we've got another color gradient. You can see contrast again. Take the contrast up, take the saturation down a little dash. And we've gone for and by the way, when it comes to these LUTs, these kind of color gradients, you know, once you kind of get your scene in an okay spot, just try them all. You never know what will look really, really good. So I think we use day, midday, and I think that's going to be quite far down. There we go, day, midday. And if we want to see this, I'm going to turn this fella off. Off, you can kind of see the effect we have. And then let's go ahead and just Control-Z that and there we go. Does a nice job sort of kind of balancing out, I think, the values of the image. Again, go ahead then and render that at 4 or 8K. I think that looks pretty good. And I'll show the finished renders at the very end. By the way, these will have no post-production, so just the raw image. All right. Hopefully that helps you out quite a bit. Now, the next one will be to jump into the Lasha-inspired image. And this, again, this is a harder look, I think, to get. A bit of an overall green tint on this, which is the best I can kind of approximate, and there's also some lovely precipitation. So lighting will stay the same. Okay, you can see here the key to this is going to be this Lenong 1 HDRI, which is, again, a very popular one because it's got a very gray sky. And it also doesn't have any objects or buildings really in the scene. We place this in, and in this situation, we've actually made it 100%. We want the HDRI to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the weight here. And we've just rotated it to where we're not seeing any kind of trees in the background. You can kind of see that a little bit. Okay, once that's done, it's time to go up here. We have actually turned off the sun completely, just none of it. And the sun size, again, not really going to affect our image here whatsoever. Ambient, look how low that ambient setting is. You can see it's very, almost non-existent ambient lighting. Now, please note, mine is really low, 0.06. I think my monitor is an okay-ish color representation, but you just want to be careful that your very low ambience might be too dark for someone else. So I would still recommend you go to Photoshop after this. But to me on my monitor, I think this looks really, really nice. Pretty happy with that. Now, in order to give it an even more moody kind of look, this sort of lovely Lasha look, I am just going to add some weather effects. So what we've done is actually just added rain, and we've moved the slider to just the point where we've got puddles, but we're not getting raindrops. I believe Twinmotion 2025 has made this a bit easier to work with. You can turn rain on or off, I think, but I haven't really messed around with that yet. So we're still in Twinmotion 24. Now, the other thing is I've gone down to precipitation. I've turned on the brightness boost. I'm not really sure if it's going to make much difference, but the wetness and puddle sliders, we've really cranked those up. So we want these big puddles. We want to make it look very much like the rain has just stopped and you've got all of this wet ground around the building. And I think overall that looks really, really nice. Don't think anything else has been really adjusted. Camera settings the same. Exposure, put it to 4. Now, in this one, the white balance, you can kind of see here, it's slightly warmer than the other ones. We had the others around 6,000. We put this up to about 7,000. And honestly, the best thing for this would just be to work in increments of maybe like 100 or 200. But about 700 looks good. Local exposure, you can see we've turned down everything. Again, we want those super dark shadows, and I don't want very high highlights on this. So we've kind of taken that all the way down, And I think that looks pretty nice. Now, under the render settings, you can see almost the same, pretty much the same as our overcast here for the most part. GI intensity 1, GI distance full, shadow very low. Again, I don't want any sort of harsh shadows. This is not going to be like this. We don't want sharp shadows. We want it to be overcast and gray. And you can kind of see here, sorry, go back to Lashin. Shadows, this slider taken all the way to the left, and the shadow bias taken all the way to the left as well. And then other than that, the key here will be Vice 2. Now, this is the same one I used when I did a video on this for either Lumen or the Path Tracer. I can't remember now. Vice 2 is all the way down the bottom, and it does a really... Let's turn it off. There we go. You can kind of hopefully see the result here. I think Vice 2, though, is a great one. It's all the way down at the bottom. And turn it on. There we go. It does add a slight greenification tint to this image, but I still think, all in all, that is pretty nice as lighting setups go. I'd love the building to be a little bit lighter, but I think in Photoshop, if you were just doing this in Photoshop, I think you could actually use the blur and dodge tools to selectively light, or a mask, to just lighten up a part of that image and darken the rest. And that would hopefully give you kind of the result you want. Anyway, thanks a million to again, Lasha. This your work is just beyond stellar. Thanks, great stuff. Good job, mate. Really impressed. This brings us to the sunrise sunset. Now, this is very similar to the bright image day, a little bit more hazy. And let's run through the settings for this. Okay, sun intensity has been dropped quite a bit, down from the 70,000 of our bright day, you can see. And what's really important for this one is the time of day slider. It's really important. We want the sunlight to be barely peeking over the landscape or the environment. Basically, you want the sun to not be at a very high angle. What would that be, like 90 degrees, 45? So maybe 15 or 20 degrees. Basically, kind of coming in at a very soft, almost horizontal angle. And I spent a lot of time rotating the sun here trying to get a good look. But if I'm doing a sunrise or sunset, I want the sun coming in almost laterally. I think that just looks better. There's no magic figure here. I just really just move this slider and get that look that you want. Drop the sun intensity because, again, the sun is not, near its kind of, the apex, not near the top. And so we just want it coming in, but it's not lighting up the scene as strongly as the sun bright day one. Sun size has been taken up, and sun reflection has been taken up. You can really see that on the right there. We're just getting a lot more kind of just light just falling into the scene in a beautiful manner. Now, the ambience, again, we did take this all the way down a little bit, not as low as the others, but generally just a little bit lower as well. And again, we're using light to focus the viewer's attention on the building and kind of giving the impression that, again, it's morning time. Now, weather, key to this, height fog. Height fog is your friend. Now, you could take this up quite high and then basically go in here to the camera settings and try and use the local exposure to get the result you're wanting. But I ended up really just kind of putting this down, I think, yeah, around 57%. Just that almost like a morning haze that hasn't fully burned off just yet. A little bit moisture in the atmosphere. And you could probably add a bit more. Settings for this are going to depend on just your scene setup, quite simply. Where your building is and where your camera is. Very beautiful look with that, though. Now, precipitation, brightness boost, we can turn it off. This was really just left over from the other renders. And you'll notice we're not using a HDRI at all. Okay, camera settings, all the same. Exposure, again, auto exposure off. It's not as bright. Let's look at the color settings for the bright day. You can see here the exposure, we've dropped this. But for the sunrise and sunset, it's at 1.97 in the positive, and the white balance, so you can see we've taken the white balance down quite a bit. A lot more blue overall in this morning image. So you're getting basically blue in the environment, but warmed from the sun as well, which is very nice. Highlights, we did go ahead and kind of clamp them down. Again, we want to bring back just a very clear blue sky. And again, with our old friend, the shadows, you just want to make those as dark as you can without making them so dark that you can't really see any of the foliage. Under the render settings here, you can see the global illumination. We've taken that all the way to the right. We're getting more light in and around, sort of, you can see that in and around the building here, just none, bit more. Global illumination distance, we've taken that all the way. Again, it's that feeling of light coming in from the side. Now, the shadows themselves, wanted to make sure here that we get a nice result on this. And so really just kind of messing around with the I don't want the shadows to be super sharp, and I don't want them to be super hazy. So I ended up on this value, 379 feet. This is arbitrary. This will very much just depend on your actual scene. And then the shadow bias, you can see here again, we're just taking this to the right as well. FX-wise, we don't have any LUT or color grading on these, but we have still taken up the contrast. You can see kind of neutral contrast. We've added that a little bit. And then again, drop that saturation. You can see if we crank it all the way to the right, what we sort of mean when we talk about saturation or none. So I think, yeah, just dropping a little bit. Generally, I really do want to drop the saturation on any render that you do in Twinmotion. The colors are very saturated. And then again, render that out. And I think I'm pretty happy with this. I think if we had the wind turned on and we were doing a video, I think with the wind blowing, I think this would look absolutely lovely. It gives that nice morning vibe. And it's just gives it a kind of nice warm atmosphere. Now on to the last one. Let's get into the stormy skies and the snowy environment. Just a brief interjection or interlude to say, if you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I genuinely do actually appreciate it. I really do. And I appreciate all of those who have taken the time to subscribe and to comment. It's the VR Render channel has only been at this for about maybe 2 years now, if even, I'm not even sure at this point. But the numbers just keep steadily growing up. And I really do want to say thank you all for watching. It's just great. And thanks so many for all those comments and all the likes. I really do appreciate it. And I genuinely hope that these videos have been educational and informative and have helped make your renders better, because really at the end of the day, that's really what we're doing this for. We want to make our artwork as beautiful and as brilliant as possible. And I hope that some of these videos have helped you out a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So now, let's look at the stormy sky. And stormy sky, sort of an interesting choice. Some people are going to love this, and I think some people will probably not. You know, if you're being paid to render out images of a home, and that's kind of mostly all I do, I just homes, really. I kind of, you know, it won't take a huge amount of effort to set one of these up, but sometimes people really appreciate just seeing their build, or sometimes their soon-to-be built house in these really beautiful, dramatic environments. So one thing I might suggest is, if you're being paid to do this, maybe throw in a couple of different lighting environments on top of the one that you're being commissioned to do. Sometimes people just appreciate it, and it won't take a huge amount of time to set up. Let's see how quick we can do this. Okay, under this is going to very much depend on the sky. Now, I'm using the it's a morning overcast 01, and look how dramatic this sky is. This is like Texas thunderstorm kind of dramatic, or a normal day in Ireland, basically, which is where I'm from. Just super dramatic sky. Now, the intensity, again, we can't crank this up. We are relying quite a bit on the HDRI not blowing out the scene. We want it almost just more like just the actual, like, we're not getting a huge amount of lighting effectively from this, because again, we're not cranking it to 100. So on top of that, then we've got to go up here and look at our sun intensity. And you can see, this is what I was saying. Some HDRIs will clamp the sun and some don't. And I don't really understand why that is. So you can see we would have our sun intensity, you know, if we're doing this normally, it's like, 70,000. It's just too bright. It's way too bright. So we brought this all the way down to 350. And I do like the look of this. We've got our HDRI up there in the sky looking all dramatic and awesome. And we have sun, the more traditional sun, lighting this up. And I believe this is still linked to, yeah, it's still linked under the details match sun to HDRI. And so I think that looks pretty sweet all in all. Other than that, we've taken down the size, the sun reflection. As far as I know, a lot of these don't should be turned off. I think they used to be turned off when you turn on the HDRI in older versions of Twinmotion. And I could be wrong on that. Now the ambient, look at this. Normally our super low ambient setting is going to be too little. So we're actually going to crank this all the way up. And so we've got a dramatic sky, very low intensity sun, adding that yellow, very nice light to this, but we're actually bringing the ambient up. We're taking this up to 1.85. By the way, by now you've probably realized just how much power this ambient slider has. And this is true of global illumination, Lumen, or the path tracer. Very important slider for just affecting the overall mood of your images. Now, weather, we haven't really added any fog here, and I don't want to add rain to this. It could look really cool. That kind of depends, though. It is doing some weird stuff to the roof, which is why I think I didn't put this on. But it would be nice to be able to have this on, make it look like rain has just fallen. But all in all, even without that, this is a dramatic shot. A lot of light falling on that building. We haven't done anything else here. Camera settings, exposure, again, there's no magic number for this, so just manually tweak it. There's a sweet spot here between just too bright and way too dark, and we settled on about 150, so that might be a good starting point to go with. White balance, again, 6000 Kelvin, bringing this further back to basically the blue lighting within the actual sky. Local exposure, again, we basically kind of turned these down. Like these, they're not really doing anything in the shot here, so we've taken them all the way down to off. And all in all, I think that looks really, really nice. Now, under the render settings, you can see the global intensity. I don't want that. I don't want sort of the fake sort of global illumination. I actually want those really dark shadows in there. As for the distance as well, not making a huge effect on this. And then shadows, again, we don't want the shadows to be too soft. You can kind of see here, a bit too soft. We actually want a little edge to them from that harsh sun. And then the shadow bias, again, I take this all the way to the left here as well. Under FX, again, contrast and saturation, the usual, but we don't have any color filter or gradient on this. There might be one in here that makes this look super awesome. I just couldn't find one that didn't override kind of what we had going on. And I kind of just liked what we have. Again, if you were doing a video and, you know, the camera's just starting on these grass plains and it's just maybe slowly moving forward, I think you'd get a really fantastic atmosphere with this. Looks super, super cool to my mind. Now, last one is going to be snow. This one, again, not the most difficult thing to set up. We go for this was noon, overcast 17, quite high intensity. You can see here, we actually do want this sort of with an overcast sky. You do, because snow is sort of reflective, and, you know, it'll bounce back light quite a bit. You do actually want kind of this, you want these settings to be brighter, basically. And so you can see here, we've taken this up quite a bit. Rotation doesn't really matter per se. It's just where you want the light falling, or do you actually want light clouds in the distance or dark clouds? And this will somewhat affect the reflections on the windows as well. In other words, what do you want reflected in those lovely windows? Okay. Moving up here, again, sun, we've turned it off. This is partially going to be affected by the HDRI, but again, 0 to 10, sort of clamped. So just off, everything off. Ambient, actually just the ambience here, just put it at 1. It seemed to work really, really well, just the default value. So it's just basically 1. Now, weather. We did go ahead and put snow on, rather unsurprisingly, and we did make the seasons into basically winter. Now, as I mentioned, I believe Twinmotion 2025 has more controls for these, so you can probably get a better result in the newest version of Twinmotion, but that might come with a risk of crashes, so maybe hold off at the moment. And then look at this. Look at super heavy height fog, really blurring out the distance or giving that dreamy, hazy quality to this. And yeah, I would probably, if I was redoing this again now today, I'd probably drop that a little bit. I want the building to stand out a bit more, but overall, super heavy on the fog. The precipitation, the brightness boost is turned on, although I haven't really noticed much difference there. And the surface effects, again, you want to turn this on, and then just puddle size and wetness won't really affect because there's no rain here, but we do want to make sure that the snow is actually turned on, that it is affecting surfaces. And rather curiously, there's some plants that this is just not affecting. This is probably a plant that I may have imported if memory serves, so you can kind of see it's not affecting it. But whatever. Overall, I think the image is still looking pretty good. Again, white balance more on the blue because, why would this be warmer? That just looks really terrible. So don't do that. Local exposure, we have this turned on. And again, we're just clamping just going in here a little bit and just affecting the highlights just a tad. There's no real magic number. You just move the slider, and if you like the result, you keep it here. And again, the shadows, you could tweak these a little bit more, but the settings that I ended up with were going to be a little bit like, there we go, 0.43 and 0.18. But honestly, again, mileage is going to vary a little bit on those. And then on the render settings, you can see here we have again that global illumination. We just have that turned down. I don't want basically illumination in the darker areas, or I want them to be occluded. And global illumination distance also quite low. And again, shadows and shadow bias. There is really a case of all these are going to be just done on a per image setting. Really, the key thing is going to be the ambient slider and how you're lighting the scene. Basically, the details tab here with the ambience, or whether you're using the HDRI. Those will be key to lighting the overall scene. Under FX, again, just kept the contrast and saturation. I wasn't able to find a color gradient that I liked, but that's not to say there isn't one there. I just didn't have enough time to go through all of these. There probably is some really lovely ones. And then again, we just rendered this out in 4K or 8. I would actually, at this point, I'll probably suggest do it in 8K. Do it in 8K, go into Photoshop, into Camera Raw, make those amazing Camera Raw changes. And that will really take the image to the next level. You can always downsize it afterwards. Depends on sort of what you're being paid to do, I think, really, or, how much time you want to spend rendering. But honestly, with Twinmotion, I would do an 8K image and then do all your fine tuning in Photoshop. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. I'm going to put up all of these images here just so you can see the end results overall. But this was a really great project to work on, and thank you for those who suggested. This was actually the most suggested topic from the people who watch my Twinmotion videos, was any tips on how to light an exterior in Twinmotion. And so hopefully, if you're new to Twinmotion, or you maybe haven't used it in a while, or maybe depending on hardware requirements, hopefully you found this sort of setup for the scenes really, really useful. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.